I made a huge mistake during my bachelor party trip with my best friend. My fiancée moved on, and I just want her back. 5 years ago Walt 28M, made a choice that royally fucked up my life. I had a lot going for me. At the time I was the new guy at my firm. I was an architect, mostly subdivisions, and really enjoying it. I had a long-term girlfriend of 3 years, Emily 29F now, 24 then, that I had recently become engaged to. I really thought nothing could derail me. After Emily said yes, we began to plan the wedding. We were not up for the big wedding thing. We agreed we would have an elopement to a coastal city. San Diego became the plan. Parents/siblings were welcome to come if they wanted, but basically we were just booking a honeymoon and getting married while we were there. Since this whole trip was going to be, relatively speaking, inexpensive, we decided to splurge on pre-wedding activities. Now, neither of us wanted traditional bachelor/bachelorette parties. We agreed we would scratch off bucket list items. Emily wanted to swim with sharks, and booked herself one of those cage dive excursions. Her and her best friend Maggie went to Florida for a long weekend and did just that. Mine was quite a bit more. I had always wanted to visit Thailand. It was one of those dumb things I got fascinated with as a 10-year-old and swore I was going to go. Emily actually encouraged me, pointing out that I literally brought up Thailand on our first date. We were 6 months into our engagement when the time came for me and my best friend, Jorge, to leave on the trip. For the first 3 days everything was great. We were enjoying beaches, visiting temples, and a lot of drinking. On that third night though, Jorge got absolutely smashed drunk. I was a little pissed about this and tried to slow him down. The next day we were supposed to go on a jungle excursion. It was one of the things I was most looking forward to, so I had been pacing myself so I could enjoy the trek. The next morning Jorge has a world-class hangover, refused to get up at all, and says we can book an excursion tomorrow. My thought was, fuck that, I'm going today. I had seen ads for a few places that did these. I went out to get some breakfast and spotted a guy on the side of road offering the jungle excursion cheap. He had a Jeep and when he noticed me looking at his sign, moved in with the hard sell. Honestly, it did look a little shady, but the guy spoke English so well it gave me a false sense of security. I decided to go with this guy. I get in, and for a while, it's actually pretty fun. He pulls off the main road on these off-road paths. I have no idea where we are going. We end up deep down these roads. I'm enjoying it for the most part though. Then everything went sideways. We stopped in this small clearing, and I was checking some things out, when out of nowhere local law enforcement pulls up. I don't know what's being said, I can only pick out a word here and a word there. They start going through the guy's Jeep and find a rather large quantity of methamphetamine. I am shitting a brick at this point. These cops take us both into their small, middle-of-nowhere station. This is when I come to realization that this motherfucker has taken me into Cambodia. I don't have my ID or passport on me, they are back in the room. These cops are not listening to anything and I have no idea what my guide is telling them. I was freaking out but also thought, it'll be okay, Jorge will realize I'm gone, look into where I am. I'm not going to go into what the next 4.5 years were like, but hell is an easy comparison. I'll just leave it at a Cambodian jail isn't the most hospitable environment. It took 5 months of sitting in that cell before I even saw a judge. The judicial system there is so backlogged, and the few public defenders that exist are basically in the large cities only. During this whole time I was never allowed to contact anyone on the outside. My first time in front the judge, they didn't have an interpreter and it got postponed another 5 months. I finally had that pre-trial hearing, entered a plea, then it was another 14 months before my actual hearing. When I finally had my hearing, the judge was very fair and dismissed my charges on time served, only for the prosecutor to appeal the dismissal. This put me back into custody for another 28 months. This was the most devastating moment of my life, to think I was out and end up still in for that long. During this time, after no one came for me, I realized they all thought I was dead. I had gone missing. Jorge had no idea where I was, I had called back home the morning I was arrested and left messages, but they only knew I was going on a jungle excursion. My parents, my fiancé, I missed them so much. There were plenty of days I was hoping one of the other inmates or a rough guard would just take me out already, especially after the first year when I became more tolerant of the food and water. Finally, after 52 months in captivity, I was released. I had nothing to my name and was in a country I wasn't supposed to be in. I contacted the embassy, and they did have a missing persons file for me. They helped me contact home. I attempted to contact my fiancé, but a guy named Mitch answered and he did not know an Emily, so I figured she must have changed her number at some point. I called my mother. She was absolutely frantic. She grabbed my father and I told her my entire tale. I kept asking about Emily and my mother kept deflecting. She wanted to get started immediately getting me home, and said we would talk about everything when I got back to the US. It took a little while to make this happen. My parents luckily had my original passport and ID, which made the process somewhat faster. During that time, they sent me money and I was able to get a hotel. My parents were very adamant I not try to contact Emily during this time and to wait until we got back. I obviously started to assume she had moved on and was with someone else, which was heartbreaking. I had held out hope during my imprisonment that she would not, but with the way my parents were acting, I assumed that was the case. Even so, I wanted to contact her immediately, before anything else. I didn't want to talk about my time there, I didn't want to talk about what they did trying to find me, or know anything about anyone else. I just wanted my fiancé. My parents sat me down and handed me a save-the-date card. It was Emily and some tall handsome guy I'd never seen before. She was engaged. I broke down. It wasn't unexpected, but the feelings were still there. I asked my parents if they had kept in touch with her beyond just being wed. Ding guest worthy. They said yes, they've actually been a huge part of each other's lives these last few years. I was a little shocked. I know they liked Emily, but with me gone I had somewhat expected them to drift apart, not get closer. I decided to ask, so how close are you guys now? My mother responded, very. Her father passed a year ago, and your dad has agreed to walk her down the aisle. That hurt. It shouldn't, but it did. Why you? Was all I could say. My mom got emotional, started going on about how they all thought I was gone, that a cartel or something got me, that they looked so hard and so long. They had a whole memorial service for me. I snapped a little. I don't care about that right now. What are you not telling me? My mother took that tablet and flipped a few photos. She then handed it back to me. There was a whole group photo. My parents, Emily, her fiancé, her mom, my sister, my brother, Emily's brother, Jorge, other friends, and kids. But at the center of the table was a boy sitting behind a birthday cake. The decorations read, "Happy 4th birthday," he was smiling big. I just looked at my parents. My mother looked at me and said, "That's your son, Paul," my dad's name, Walter, my name, Ryan, our last name. Update. In the 2 weeks since I got back home, it simultaneously feels like so much has happened, and that virtually nothing has happened. I have been largely brought up to speed on all that has happened on this side of the world. When Jorge finally got up out of bed that day 5 years ago, he tried to call me. After having no success, the officers confiscated my phone immediately upon arrest. I never saw it again. He decided to just go about his day, assuming I was enjoying my excursion. It wasn't until it was well past dark that he started to get concerned. He called back home to see if anyone else had heard from me. The next morning, my family and fiancé were blowing up his phone wondering if I had come back yet. That's when he began venturing out to all the excursion places. They all reported that they had not seen me. He began to panic and alerted everyone back home. He went to the authorities at this point. My parents, brother, and fiancé all made the trip to join him. They spent a month canvassing the area before they had to go back. My parents made another trip to Thailand to try and find me, but again turned up nothing. Over the next year and a half they were a constant reminder to the Thai officials of my disappearance. Unfortunately, no one thought to look in Cambodia. Meanwhile, my fiancée Emily came to the realization she was pregnant. On the day I left for Thailand, she was unknowingly around 10 weeks. I can only imagine how hard it was on her. I'm missing, she's pregnant with my child. I wish I had never gone. My parents told me Emily really leaned on them, and they were happy to help. Over the years, they've just grown closer and closer. Her parents were there, and supportive, but they are much older than mine and not in as good of health. My mom ended up taking Emily to a lot of her OB appointments. She was there in the delivery room along with Emily's mom. It was apparently very stressful as Paul was born at just 34 weeks. Luckily, he showed no signs of health problems, and they just kept him under heightened observation initially. My parents tell me they needed this. The anguish of not knowing what happened to me was very hard, and the birth of their grandson provided a much-needed respite from the grief. They keep telling me how sorry they are, but they didn't do anything wrong. I guess it's just guilt now that they know I was out there, and they failed to find me. Jorge has been by to see me. He has apologized far too many times. He's gotten married since the trip, and has 2 kids now. He seems nervous around me, and I guess that's fair. I do hold some resentment towards him. It's not his fault, but the feeling is there anyway. My brother and sister have marched on with life. My brother has kids now, and my sister is married. I missed all of this. I could probably get over all of that, but losing my fiancé and missing out on 4 years with my son, it's been too much. My parents have set me up with a therapist. I went to the first session but have no idea what to talk about. I was wrongfully incarcerated for 5 years, beaten at times, starved at times. Plenty of PTSD. My whole family thought I was dead, so much so they had a memorial service for me 3 years to the day of my disappearance. I was supposed to marry the love of my life, and she is now engaged to someone else. Then to top it all off, I have a 4-year-old son, who has been raised by my replacement since he was 18 months old. Paul only knows this guy as Dad, he calls him Dad, and now here I am, back from the dead to fuck up everyone else's perfect little lives. I'm ranting though. It's just too much to unpack. I still haven't directly spoken to Emily. My father went to her house the day after my return. He sat her and her fiancé, Kevin 34M, down, told them I had been found. She began to tear up, she thought he was saying my body had been recovered. When he corrected her, she had a complete breakdown. Her fiancé comforted her, my dad said she was just silent afterwards. I tried texting her, I got no response for a whole day, then just a "I'm so sorry, I just can't right now." I haven't asked anyone about her fiancé, other than I know she's been engaged for about 2 months, and the wedding is supposed to be in 6. No one has just volunteered any information at this point. We were supposed to all meet at the park this past weekend. My resurgence has thrown the harmony out of whack and I can tell everyone is a little off. My mother typically watches Paul while Emily and Kevin are at work. A lot of time it's at her house, but since I showed up it's been exclusively over at Emily's. I hear they are prepping him to meet me. He is aware I'm his father. My pictures are all over at my parents' house. Emily has apparently always had a picture of me up in Paul's room. I'm a shell of the guy in the picture, but I guess at least I kinda look like that still. He won't be totally blindsided. My parents and I arrived at the park first. When we saw their car pull up, only Kevin and Paul got out. Emily was not with them. Paul ran up to my dad first and gave him a big hug. He saw me and kind of retreated to my mom, then over to Kevin. I could tell he was nervous, I mean shit, so was I, and I'm not 4 years old. The other adults tried to say something to get us to talk or embrace or something. I told them to let it go, let him go play. He perked up and ran off to the playground. Kevin came up and stuck his hand out. We shook, and he said, "Sorry, Emily, couldn't today." We were about out the door and she broke down, told me she wasn't ready. I just said, "I understand." I went over to the playground to try and bond in some way. Turns out Paul is big into superheroes. He pretended to be Spider-Man and I had to be Rhino. I chased him all over the playground and let his web me up. He laughed and smiled. When the food was ready, I was happy to see he liked his hot dogs the same as me. Ketchup on one side, mustard on the other, relish on top. I thought maybe this won't be so hard. Then he called Kevin Dad. I shouldn't have surprised by this. He's been in this kid's life for 2.5 years, he marrying his mom, they all live in the same house. That all said, it was like a knife in the heart, I began to actually tear up. I excused myself for a moment, and said I was going over to the Gross Park bathroom. When I came out after a minute, Kevin was waiting. I could see my parents across the way watching Paul. I felt instantly awkward. The last thing I wanted right now was a heart-to-heart with Kevin. He was taller than me, more built than me, and had gotten to have the life I was supposed to have. He just said, "Can we talk?" I said, "Yeah, man, what's on your mind?" Kevin began, "Look, I'm sorry for what happened to you, it's a bad deal all around. I just wanted to talk because I'm worried about Emily and Paul. Emily more than him. She hasn't been herself, which I can appreciate to some degree. It took a long time for her to get over you. I'm the first person she dated after your incident. She cried the first time we kissed because it was different. I want you to have a relationship with your son, he's little, he's resilient. I had 2 dads growing up, I know he will be fine. I don't know how fine her or you will be if this goes too fast, and from a selfish standpoint I don't want anything disrupting our life or our engagement. I love her, and want what's best. I'd like you two to take it slow and process everything before you meet. I made an appointment for her to see a counselor. I'd appreciate it if you could respect that and not push her or reach out to her. Let her figure things out on her own first." I was pissed listening to him, pretentious ass, but fuck, he had some points. I don't want to rip open all these old wounds. I ended up just saying, "Yeah man, I can do that." And walked off to join my parents and Paul. Kevin went into the gross bathroom. When he came back over, he said him and Paul were going to head out. Paul gave everyone hugs, including me. I was surprised, but pleasantly. Then he called me Rhino, and ran off to Kevin. As they left, I heard him say, "Dad, can we get a cookie cake on the way home?" Ugh, he's Dad, I'm Rhino, and this just fucking sucks. Update. We finally met. We started by texting a bit, but it felt so impersonal, the conversation stayed at a surface level. The deepest we really got was talking about Paul and me briefly divulging what Cambodian prison was like. Over the 3 weeks between our first text exchange and our meet-up, we only texted maybe 5 times, and each time it started to get into heavy subjects one of us would end the conversation. During that time though, I did spend more time with Paul. My mother began watching him at her house again, and that gave us time to bond. I even had some one-on-one time with him when we went to get ice cream together one day. It's amazing how resilient kids are, he just goes with the flow of everything. He still calls me Rhino, but maybe I'll get the dad title soon. One day this past week, when Kevin came by to pick up Paul, he asked to talk again. This time, he had a job offer for me, which had me getting pissed. Then he elaborated that it wasn't really an offer, but more of a lead. His brother owns a construction company and is looking for an estimator. Kevin told his brother I was once an architect, and his brother said he'd give me an interview if I was interested. He left his brother's card with me. I really want to hate Kevin, but he does actually seem to be a genuinely nice person, which also pisses me off. His self-deprecating sense of humor grows on you fast, and this is just in 5 to 10 minute interactions with him. But at the same time, fuck that guy. I talked to Emily via text this past Friday. We agreed to meet the next day for lunch. I suggested this Italian place that had been our place, but she got a little upset about this, and I thought she was going to cancel. Instead, we pivoted to Applebee's. Seeing her in person, I can't even describe. She was just as beautiful as ever. The hello hug caused a shiver through my spine, I didn't want to let go, and may have lingered for just a second, but also didn't want to make it weird. We exchanged pleasantries and small talk through the ordering, and at that point the conversation took the first serious turn since my return, and it stayed that way for the next hour as we talked. She told me how hard it was to deal with my death. She was pregnant and grieving, and a lot of days didn't want to carry on. It hurt so bad to listen to what she was going through. She told me she felt so alone anytime she was in our apartment that she spent most nights staying at her parents' or mine. She kept hoping that every time the phone rang it would be someone with news about me, and then began to hope it wasn't, because as time went on it became more likely that it would be a call that they found my body. She told me about how great my parents, and to a lesser degree my siblings, had been to her. My SIL and her even had slightly overlapping pregnancies, so it was fun to have someone to talk to about it. It was after Paul's first birthday that my parents of all people talked to her about getting back out there. She admitted she was really only spending time with her parents, or my SIL, and by extension my brother. She said she even fell off hanging out with her best friend. Emily told me it was fear. She never wanted to be away from Paul. If I could disappear in an instant, then that means anyone could. She wouldn't be able to live without him. After this intervention, she realized she was living like a widow and not a 25-year-old woman. She began hanging out with her friends again, let others watch Paul occasionally so she could go out. It was 2 months into her attempts at living life that she ran into Kevin. They were in a Starbucks. She was fumbling trying to get her phone out while holding Paul. When suddenly, this tall handsome fucker, my words, comes up and scans his phone, buying her coffee and muffin. They strike up a conversation while waiting. When her order gets called, he grabs it and hands it to her along with a business card with his cell number on it. Kevin owns a screen printing shop. Tells her, no pressure, but I'd like to get to know you better. Then they part ways. She called him the next day. 4 months later, she introduced Paul to him. A year later, they moved in with him, and a few months ago, they got engaged. This is where I said my piece. I told her I still loved her, that it's impossibly hard to see her with someone else. The idea of getting back to her was one of the few things that kept me going when I was locked away. She began to cry, and I reached out and took her hand. I asked if she was sure, or if there was any way we could try again. In hindsight I feel like this was a dick move, but at the time I needed to know. She shook her head. Looked up at me and said, I love you. I never stopped, but I love Kevin too, and I'm marrying him. It's not fair, I know it's not fair, you didn't do anything wrong, but I had to move on. I spent years thinking you had died. When you came back I was so happy, but also so guilty. I cut her off there. You have nothing to feel guilty about. I fucked up and cost myself everything. I always knew you'd likely moved on, and I don't fault you for that. I was gone. There was no reason for you to believe I was coming back, but I did dream that I'd find my way back and you'd be there when I returned. I realized that was unrealistic. I'm sorry for putting you in this position now. She said, it's okay, I knew this was coming eventually. We just kind of stopped talking at that point. Sat there just drinking our drinks. After a few minutes that seemed like eternity, she said, how do you want to move forward when it comes to Paul? I told her, I love him already and want to be in his life. She replied, I'm so happy for that. I always told him about you. I didn't want him to think he was abandoned. I said, he is the one bright spot in this whole situation. From there she told me that Kevin had planned to adopt him once they were married, but wouldn't now that I have returned. I am listed on the birth certificate as the father, although I think I'll meet with a lawyer just to make sure everything is in place from a legal standpoint. We made some plans to meet together later in the week with Paul. Let him have fun with all of his parents at the same time. She also encouraged me to do more one-on-ones with him. At the end, we hugged one more time and parted ways. When I got back to my parents' house and in my room, I broke down. The finality of it all was just too much. After I recovered, I decided I was not going to wallow in my grief anymore. I needed to swallow some pride and get on track to do something with myself. The next day, I called Kevin's brother and did an interview that day. He hired me. This is the first step towards moving on. Update. Holy shit, you are not gonna believe what I'm about to tell you. These last 6 months have been nothing short of absolutely fucking crazy, but in a good way. After my first initial face-to-face with Emily, I decided I needed to move on with my life, and I ended up getting hired to be an estimator for Kevin's brother Kyle's 36M construction company. It was going well, and at about the 2-month mark Kyle, knowing I was an architect, started asking me to design some of his custom builds and would compare them to the usual architect he was using. He was liking mine better, and while I still work as an estimator still, I am now solely designing the custom homes for Kyle, and he gave me a huge raise. This allowed me to get my own apartment, and I'm thankful to say I am no longer living in my parents' house. Emily and Kevin's wedding plans progressed with only one major change. My father was no longer walking her down the aisle, as everyone felt it was inappropriate given my return. Her much older brother was going to take that role now. Emily was an oops baby, so her brother is 16 years older than her. After our initial lunch, I saw Emily a lot more often. We were making it a point to do something all together with Paul at least once a week. Kevin was there as well, but they kept the couple behavior to a minimum. It was fun. I especially enjoyed getting to talk to Emily and just be around her. After a month of this back-to-school season hit. I guess in the screen printing industry, this is the busy season. Which I guess makes sense with fall sports, staff shirts, clubs, Greek life. Kevin has contracts with all the school districts and is used heavily by the local colleges in the area. He became swamped at this time. Which led to Emily, Paul, and I spending a lot more time just the three of us. Over the months of this, we became a lot closer. Hello side hugs became lingering full front hugs. Emily and I would talk about all sorts of things. It kind of reminded of me when we were first dating. After a couple of months, Kevin began joining us all again. This didn't dissuade Emily and I from rebuilding our friendship. And then the most amazing thing happened. Paul started calling me Dad. I literally teared up like the first 10 times he did this. Life went on for the next couple of months. It was a week before the wedding. I was not going to attend, my parents were as guests only. That weekend they decided to have semi-combined bachelor/bachelorette parties. Each was going out to dinner with friends, then friends activity, her karaoke him top golf, then they'd all meet up at a bar or club around 11 p.m. I wasn't involved in any of this, and had no idea which place they were going to end at. I decided I was going out that night, instead of just sitting in my apartment being a dud. It was a hard night for me as it was another reminder that I had lost her to someone else. No matter how good of a dude he was, I still hated it. It was around 10:30 that night, I had a good buzz, and was planning on getting an Uber home when Emily and her bachelorette crew walked in. I kind of hid in the crowd at first, not wanting to butt into her night, but she spotted me. Emily came over and we began to talk. It was a little bit flirty. A song she loved came on and she began to dance, then dance on me. I joined in and we were laughing and having fun. As the song ended, she kind of stumbled into me, I caught her and we looked at each other. Our lips moved in close and we almost kissed when she pulled back. We laughed it off and moved to the bar to get a drink. It was probably a good thing we didn't kiss, because about 2 minutes later, Kevin came walking up. He was trying to be his usual self, but seemed a little off. They kissed, and I began to feel like the third wheel, so I went ahead and ordered that Uber and headed home. The next day I'm a little hungover and slept in pretty heavy on my lazy Sunday. It was midday, and I hear someone try and open my door. It was locked, and they began knocking heavily. I ran over and opened the door. It was Emily. She lunged into my arms and kissed me. It was the sweetest feeling I have ever felt. Confusing, but sweet. I asked her what was going on. She said, Kevin came to me this morning and started asking some hard questions. I don't want to go into it, I promise I'll tell you everything one day, but I'm in no place to do so now. We decided to end things. I admitted my feelings were still strong for you. He said he understood, that it hurt but that he knew. He said we both deserve to be happy, and he is going to step away. I called your parents, they are good keeping Paul a bit longer. I love you and want to be with you, and I'm suspecting you feel the same way. I told her that was all I ever wanted. It's been a whirlwind. She had 2 bags packed for her and Paul, and they moved in with me that same day. The next day my father went to visit Kevin. He told me Kevin looked a little hungover and had taken the day off. They had a talk and my dad tried to be as empathetic as he could. He just wanted to check on him as Kevin had been a large part of their lives over the past few years. He asked Kevin what he was going to do. He said beyond trying to get some deposits back, he had no idea. My father offered to refund him his money and take over the reservations. He didn't ask why, my father thinks he knew. While this was going on, I had to go into work and face Kyle. He called me into the office upon my arrival. Kyle had me sit and began, "Just let me say my business. I'm angry, my brother tells me to let it go, and I will. I want to take that anger out on you but I'm not going to. My brother and I learned the hard lesson back in high school when it comes to revenge and swore we'd always be the bigger men going forward, but that's not a tale for now. I think it's best we part ways, my family needs time to heal. I won't leave you high and dry though. You get 1 week paid off here, in that time I want you to speak to an acquaintance of mine, Lee. Lee runs a construction company as well, and he says he will take you on at your current salary. It's commercial instead of residential, but you'll do fine." I stood up and started to thank him, but he cut me off. "This isn't for you, it's for Kev. Now go get your things, and get up out of here." I contacted Lee the same day. He told me I could start in 2 weeks. Once my father came back and said he now had control of the wedding accommodations. Emily and I just looked at each other and knew we each wanted this. It wasn't the wedding we always wanted, we planned on getting married on a beach. It was Kevin that wanted the traditional wedding. In the end he was right though, we had an amazing time. Jorge was my best man. She looked stunning in her dress. Getting me a tux rental on short notice was probably the biggest headache, but that worked out too. Neither of us had huge friend or family groups, but it was nice to enjoy celebrating with those that had supported us through all these dark times. It's been a month now since our wedding. I still can't believe it. Paul had a little trouble adjusting. He does miss Kevin, but he has seemed happier the last week. To be where I once was and be where I am now, I consider myself beyond lucky.